Good morning for another Off the Cuff with Major Henry Gray. I'm sitting in for the host, Sheriff Bobby Kimbrough. I am honored with Hispanic Heritage Month to bring a good friend, Alex Molina, Inspector with DMV. Alex, how are you?
I'm doing great, sir. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, the Sheriff's Office, Forsyth County, for having me in the show today.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Good to see you, my friend.
For some people that don't know you like I do, tell me your journey as far as being in law enforcement. Anybody influence you, your path, how you got here?
Well, I ended up in law enforcement, and my journey, as you say, was a long one. Been in 20 years of service. I started in 2001 with the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Ron Barker hired me, but I was interested at a young age. My father asked me, walking me to school some time ago. I probably was like 10 or 11. He asked me what I wanted to do when I'm his age. And I mentioned two things. I said I want to be a lawyer or a cop. And he was like, no, go to school, become a lawyer, obviously, for safety reasons. And he wanted me to get that educational background. So when I started inquiring about law enforcement, I just had a passion about helping people. And I actually looked into EMS, so EMT first in New York, originally from New York City, of Dominican descent, from Latino. And that's how that started. How I ended up in North Carolina. My brother is military, Camp Lejeune, and he knew that I was working in New York City, and he knew that I always had a passion to be an enforcement. So I even tried auxiliary in New York, which is a program that they have for young people who cannot be sworn yet, and I've done that for a little extent in New York City. Then that drove him to notice that I was interested, and he was already on the process of being hired with the Salem Police Department. So obviously, my older brother, he said, hey, I got my foot in the door. Come on down here. Now, mind you, didn't know that it was a Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I just thought North Carolina was Charlotte, North Carolina.
Right.
So I was a teenager, wasn't old enough to be sworn, made the trip down here. He was going through basic school. I enjoyed talking to him about it. And he just kept feeling inside of me that this is where I've been called for. I got the opportunity to meet a former deputy who is now retired at Clemens Middle, because I worked in maintenance with the school system when I first got to North Carolina, and told her my story. And she said, well, we're hiring at the detention center. And that's how my journey began into the sheriff's office, in reference to getting involved in law enforcement. So I started at the detention center.
And I can say that, including myself starting at a detention center, it makes a better officer where you can understand the residents of the detention center. But as you go forward, somebody must have recognized you. I know, like I said, we worked together as colleagues. We've been gym rats together. And what got you out of the detention center? Somebody saw something. And I know, as in law enforcement, we've seen something in you, just what you brought to the table as far as your work ethic, your energy. And I can speak for myself how you changed the game for law enforcement being bilingual.
Well, before getting into law enforcement, my basketball coach in New York, he kept us in the straight and narrow. I didn't grow up with a silver spoon. My dad was the breadwinner, and he just instilled hard work and ethic in us. He worked 14-hour days. He would be home, obviously, at nighttime and make sure our homework was done, make sure no troubles was at school. Always told us, keep your head up, look at people in the eye, shake their hand, which come along with when you talk to someone in law enforcement. So my coach and my dad pretty much set the groundwork of the work ethic, because he was a hardworking man, 6 days a week, 14-hour days. Coach kept us on the straight and narrow because you have to have good grades and keep your nose clean to be able to play in the team as a starter, which, back then I was. And that's something that you need in the record to become law enforcement. Your record has to be clean.
Absolutely,
we all know that.
Absolutely.
As far as other law enforcement officer, two come to mind. So when I worked at the jail, Lieutenant Artis, who's now retired, he was my go-to for any questions or uncertainties that I had as a new officer at the jail. I worked there for 18 months and then had the privilege to come out and go to BLET, sponsored by the Sheriff's Office himself. So J.B. Davis, another name from the past, he kind of guided me, and there's others, Todd Smith, who was the director of the school at that time. He saw something in me. He said, hey, keep your nose clean. You come out here, do the job, and you'll be able to be a good officer. So without those folks knowing me, because again, I was new from New York City, they saw something in me that at times we doubt ourselves. And I just kept at it, try to get the highest scores doing the weekly tests, and definitely when we took the final exam. And those are the four people that I could say: my coach, my dad at a younger age, and then JB Davis and Lieutenant Artis from jail.
Well, I'm going to switch gears for a second before I dive into the meat of it. I know being in narcotics and being in from some of the areas that having family in some of the areas that I worked in, it has certain challenges. You being Latino in certain areas, you may be looked upon certainly. How did you deal with that challenge?
I always try to educate in any encounter, especially people of Latino descent. So when I started working at the sheriff's office and in law enforcement, or even at the detention center, I would see Latinos come in, and I would try to talk to them to stay out of trouble. One-on-one conversations. When I started working the streets outside of the detention center, I ended up working in a large populated area, the south side of Winston. Some of it fell in the county, zone 2. Most of it now is in the city, which was part of the area that I worked for license and theft until November of last year. So my encounter is always to educate. We have the authority to enforce, and we know that as officers, but with enforcement comes education as well.
Absolutely.
And that's always been my engagement with folks. To some folks, I don't look Latino, which has helped me in my safety at times, because they might speak Spanish and not recognize that I'm Latino, bilingual, and safety issues, traffic stop, one of them comes into mind, which a weapon was found during the traffic stop because of what they said, which has worked to my advantage. But then I think in hindsight, folks look at me and say, you know what? He's doing it. He's in the business 20 years. I could do that too. And now in my tenure now, I get that more than before. The culture has changed. So before it was like, oh, you're a traitor. You're going against your own. How can you do that? But now, even though there's bad publicity in law enforcement, the encounters that I have is like, hey, keep doing it. We know you're doing the good instead of the bad, and basically continue on the fight for us.
With that being said, and I know it's a language barrier at times, and you've been an inspector for DMV. A lot of people think inspector, this guy's doing government regulations or admission regulations. Tell us a little more in detail what you actually do as an inspector, because you, doing my research, is probably for this region, the first Latino in this area that has that rank of inspector in your region, I'm thinking.
Yeah, Major, I'm the only Latino inspector in the state of North Carolina.
And I stand corrected, ladies and gentlemen. Only
inspector.
I stand corrected.
I'm the only inspector that's Latino or Latino descent for the License and Theft Bureau. So with that, I ask a lot of pressure because I will be judged whether it be positive or negatively on my actions. Like we all do, but they could point me out faster than anyone else. What I do for license and theft, we wear many hats, like most law enforcement officers. We do concentrate on the regulations of motor vehicle sales and purchases and trades. We also regulate the inspection program. That's what we mostly known, but we do traffic violations. We work closely with other agencies. We do what is called asset restoration, which is that somebody grinds a VIN number or a serial number of a weapon. We could bring that serial number back by using acid and other techniques. We also, like I said, traffic stops. We also do identity theft. That's big with us. Identity theft, when it falls under the driver's license, somebody takes your information but put their picture on that driver's license and they receive it and purchase things, homes, or just commit crimes, or get pulled over and show that driver's license to the officer and get a ticket with your information. However, it's their picture. We help people who fall in those situations, and that's big business for us on that end.
So, for instance, for example, in the Latino community, how do you reassure them? Because I know it's a lot of unrest about possible illegal or legal.
Yes, sir.
How do you because some of them are afraid to come, or some of them are afraid to talk, or some communities may. How do you adjust and how do you address that?
Well, one of the ways is just assuring them that I have no immigration status. That's not what my concern is there. Unfortunately, the Latino community is one of the most thought out communities for crime. Just for what you mentioned, one, they're not really going to report to the police because they're afraid of that. That they're going to go ahead and see that there are illegals. One, I assure them that that's not what I'm there for, and I assure them why they're the victim of a crime. Obviously, it does help that I speak their language. So within that first conversation, a meet and greet, they open up because there's someone here who speaks my language, especially with what I do for licensed theft, because again, I'm the only Latino there. So I've been called to calls on my assigned area, and I've gone as far as Charlotte, North Carolina to assist others with their investigation where the victims are afraid to come forward because of the lack of language barrier. Well, not the lack of the language barrier. So within the first encounter, I try to let them know you're resident or non-resident. It doesn't matter to us. What I'm here to see is that you are a victim of crime. This is how you are a victim of crime. And again, it goes back to educating the victims.
And on that point, you bring a great point in saying that education. And I'm gonna step out on a limb. What could you say to officers because of a cultural difference and how they perceive us? How would you tell officers up and coming to deal with situations of that language barrier? How would you address them?
Well, patience. You have to be patient because when someone doesn't understand something, or at least with me, patience runs thin. But you have to have the patience and the willingness to help that person, regardless of what they speak. If there were Asians and they speak another language, in this case being Latino, we have to be patient. Get the resources that you need. And if you don't have them, reach out to someone. There's someone somewhere in one agency that's willing to help. I'm available to any officer that works for Forsyth County Sheriff's Office. I've done it for the city. I even done it at federal level. But patience, I would say, is the number one thing, because without that, you're not going to think straight and you're going to rush and you're going to miss that one detail that's going to make that person feel more comfortable as a Latino, non-speaking or non-resident, whichever it might be, with that officer that's there. Because remember, when something bad happens, outside of the defendant or the accomplice, the police is the second one you see.
And I commend you and on your accomplishments here, and I commend you on your accomplishment in DMV. But if you could say, I think back, if I was 21, would I do this all over again? But a lot of people don't understand the nature of how society is from when we were doing it to what it is now. Going back, would you do this all over again?
Yes.
And why?
It allows me to help. Really, I think that's one of the things that's broken in system or the world, if you would, the lack of compassion or empathy for another person when they need help. I go by saying the only time I'm looking at somebody is when I'm picking them up. That's the only time I need to be looking at somebody. And I live by those words, because if it wasn't for the coach, my father, those two officers, many officers, I don't want to exclude anybody, but I can't remember a lot of those names now during that interview. But, they helped me up. They kept me. Hey, you could do it. Continue to fight, continue to fight, continue to fight. I would definitely say that. I would do it over because I like helping people.
As a law enforcement officer of Latino descent, what would you tell these young men, young women that are going to that route where, we hate to say the word gangs or different groups? What would you tell them to make a difference? If you had to tell the community anything right now, what would you tell them?
Well, I'll tell the community as a whole, and particularly the young audiences, that we know where that path is going to lead. I'm sure they know a friend, a brother, or some family member that went that route and it ended up either incarcerated or in a casket. And we don't want that. We want our young society to thrive. We want everyone to places good. I will ask them to always ask this question when somebody is leading them in any direction. What is the benefit of this direction? And if the true interest of myself is involved in that interest of that person. And if jail is going to be part of it or the casket, then I would say that it's not the best interest of that person to lead you. We do have role models. It's harder because of COVID. You can't get around much. Things are closed because of COVID, but there's someone who does care, and I do care. I have conversations with teenagers all the time. Again, I work the south side of Winston-Salem. You and I have worked together in some assignments. We've led us in the south side of Winston and other areas in Winston-Salem that, we will take this young man and sometimes young ladies aside and say, hey, listen, this is not what we're meant to do. You're better than this. And some listened, some didn't, but it goes to the old saying, if one listens, it speaks for the masses.
And I can honestly say that, we've been in the trenches together. We worked hustles together, which is off-duty assignments. And by far, you're a stand-up man, you're a stand-up guy. Won't go into a lot of the personal things, but it has been an honor and a privilege to serve with you.
Thank you.
To be with you and do this interview. I was excited about it. I was like, okay, what do I say? Nah, I can't talk about that because we both know about that.
It's all good. It's all good. We have.
But I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and please be safe, be blessed, and thank you again.
Well, we appreciate that, and I just want to add to this, and thank you for that outro. You've been great to work with. You obviously has led me in the right direction when we worked together. I looked up to you as a big guy. I'm a big guy.
Huge guy. Huge.
Sorry, sir. But what I like to say is that, I like for people to view me as a person of my community and diversity. I know we mentioned and we talked briefly about me being the only inspector in the month that it is, which is Hispanic Heritage Month, which is very important to be recognized and thank the state of North Carolina and Forsyth County for recognizing that month and their employees. But what I really want to say is, to add is that, we're all a pillar of our community. We should strive to do that. And just because I'm just that one person in this agency, Sir Robert Peel said it the best, the police is the public and the public is the police. So I enjoy working with anyone. I enjoy working those communities, especially the Latino communities because of that, because I truly believe that I bring in some type of value to the community from my experience and being a Latino male and my upbringing. Like I mentioned before, my neighborhood was tough. My household was great. Dad was the keeper. My mom was a homemaker, and there was no games played in there. However, when I left that door to go to school, like most young men and most young adults now, reality sets. I'm not protected by the bubble, but there are people, especially law enforcement, that do care, and I'm one of those people.
Appreciate that. With that, thank you for your time. And I would drop the mic. I don't know how you say it in Spanish, but I'm going to drop the mic on that. It couldn't have been said any better. I appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you, my friend. Good to see you again.
Always.